Welcome, students and listeners, to this video lecture series regarding the basics of medical imaging system, particularly tomographic technique. I am Arindam Chakraborty, Assistant Professor at the Department of Biomedical Engineering in School of Engineering and Technology, Adamas University, West Bengal, India. So this course basically will cover the basics of tomographic techniques to help you understand the, this what is known as computer tomography. So before moving further into the details of tomographic techniques or the nitty-gritties of tomographic techniques, let me briefly introduce you to the term medical imaging. So as you can understand from these two words, medical imaging means any method or any imaging process that used for the sole purpose of medical or clinical assessment. So now the obvious question arises how it is different from that of a regular photography or regular imaging technique. And that to say that medical imaging, to refine medical imaging, it is the process which which can produce visual representation of the internal regions of a living system, or here we'll consider human body, which is difficult, if not completely impossible, for a normal person to visualize in naked eyes for clinical as well as medical interventions. So medical imaging is a method for generating visual representation of the internals of a living system, a living human body, which is otherwise difficult to visualize with naked eye. So the process of medical imaging is important for several reasons: for physical clinical interventions by physicians, for evaluating the structural abnormalities or the functioning of any organs of the body, or it can be completely research motivated. So we can say one particular important point being that medical imaging, the majority of medical imaging are non-invasively done to produce the internal images of a living system. So there are several modes of several modalities of imaging technique that are used in modern days clinical settings. We can broadly classify them as radiation based or non-radiation based on the source of the image producing system. So from the radiation based one, we can the most common, popular among them is the X-ray or X-ray radiography, and also fluoroscopy and computed tomography, which is again uses X-ray, but they have certain sophisticated physics, sophisticated instrumentation for better visualizing the internal structures. Apart from X-rays, there are other modes of radiation that are used, which are mainly nuclear based, that is positron emission tomography or simply PET. And also there are other non-radiation based, and popular among them are the MRI or magnetic resonance imaging, which uses strong magnetic field to image the internal structures of a system, and ultrasound, which uses, as the name suggests, high frequency sounds that in the megahertz range. Now, to delve deeper into the tomography or other computer tomography system, let me briefly introduce you to the concept of X-ray and X-ray radiography. So X-ray is nothing but electromagnetic energy that is carried by what we call photons. So whenever we can talk about X-rays interacting with matter, that can be metallic implant placed inside the body, that can be the soft tissues, bones, any other internal organs of the body. So we essentially talk about the X-ray photons interacting with the internal structures of those organs. So the how X-rays are different from visible light, since visible light is also a electromagnetic energy carried by light photons. So X-ray coming to the this image, the visible light has comparatively lower energy compared to X-rays, which has higher energy as well as high frequencies. Because of this, the higher energy level in X-ray as compared to visible light rays, they have better penetrating power. Therefore, the visible light cannot penetrate a living system or the internal to visualize the internal organs, they can be used to superficially image the structures, whereas X-rays can be used to visualize the internal aspects of a system. X-rays were discovered by Röntgen in 1895, and it was termed X-rays because initially its nature were unknown. That's why the X-ray the name was X-ray. And what is a radiography? Radiography is nothing but a spatial photograph made by exposing a photographic film with nothing other than X-rays. So there is a source that produces X-ray, there is a detector or a photographic film that captures the image, and between the source and the detector there is the object, or for let's assume any human subject. So the film that is produced by the attenuation or absorption of the X-ray by the different objects or the different organs, soft tissues, bone inside the body, that is uh, depicted as a picture, and that is known as radiography. So since X-ray can produce solid objects, then they are slightly attenuated by them. The picture resulting from the exposure level reveals the internal structure. What does this mean? That simply mean, and we can see from here that the X-ray actually produces the internal bony structure of this hand, which was the first one image taken by the X-ray by Röntgen himself. And this is the ring that is of made up of metallic any metals. So that this is of radiograph, and the process is known as radiography. And to understand the radiographs and the modern application of X-rays, here are two typical applications. In the left, this is what is known as this is a image radiograph of the human jaw bones showing all the teeth. This is known as a panoramic X-ray. The important thing to notice here is that the 3D structure of the human jaw has been converted to a panoramic 2D view where we can see the position and the alignment of the teeth. And on the right, this is known as what is known as this is the knee joint that has been done through the X-ray. These are a few applications of the modern radiograph where the internal structure, any deformities or abnormalities can be visualized with the simplest application of X-ray. Now, making coming to the application of X-ray to better visualize the internal structure, it is computed tomography that are commonly used. So, computed tomography's computed part basically means to define computed tomography. The computed part basically means to use computer to generate the output, to generate the image. But the important term here is the word tomography. So what does tomography means? It's essentially can be break down into two parts. One is known as the tomos, another is the graphia or simply graphy. They are Greek words, ancient Greek words. So tomography means tomos means to slice or to section, and graphia or graphy means to write or to describe. So in simpler words, the tomography refers to a computerized X-ray based imaging procedure in which the beam of X-ray is aimed at a patient to image its internal structure by sectioning that structure or slicing that structure virtually. It is also known as the computed tomography was also known as CAT scan or computed axial tomography or computed assisted tomography. So basically they form 2D slices or 2D images, cross-sectional images, and that that can be digitally processed using computer-based technologies to form a 3D representation of that structure of the internal aspects. So in medical domain, CT scan combine a series of X-ray images to generate the sectioning or the slicing of the object, and uses computer processing to create the 3D cross-sectional images of the bones, body, other body soft tissues, body organs, blood vessel, etc. So the computed tomography system was invented by the famously known physicist Hornfield in 1972, and Alan Cormack, uh, independently in, and both of them received Nobel Prize for the computer tomography in 1979. Initially, the computer tomography system that was developed, that was for only for the imaging of the brain, and the scanner, the scanner used to took several hours and several days to produce the image, as contrast to modern day system which can do it in a few seconds or maximum in 5 minutes. And so the next important thing being, what is the differences, what are the contrasts between X-ray based radiography and computer tomography? The first and the most important thing being that the image quality of computer tomography is much more better as compared to X-ray, while the simplicity and the ease of use of X-ray is way better as compared to computer tomography, which is rather a cumbersome instrument to handle, and the overall procedure is quite uh, difficult as compared to our X-ray based system. And for the visualization purposes and the overall information that the clinician can receive from the images is way higher in case of computer tomography. And again, the visualization, when coming to the visualization, if there, since X-ray produces the images of a 2D or 2D images of the internal structure, so uh, the structures that falls within that the X-ray range basically superimposes as compared to CT, which takes cross-sectional images where different structures can be visualized. Now, to before going much into the deeper understanding of computer tomography, let's discuss a few important concepts. So the first thing is the CT slice. Since we already talk about the tomographic or the definition of tomography, where tomos basically means slicing the structure, or tomography basically describe or image a structure by virtually slicing it. So slice is nothing but the cross section of the body which is being scanned for generating the CT image. So it's the slice in this image. This is if this the area that is being scanned by this the green color, that is the X-ray beam. So this being the slice or the sectioning, the slice has a width, therefore it has a certain volume. This we'll talk about in the later slides. So slice is basically the cross section of the body that is being scanned by the CT image, by the CT, by the X-ray. The ray, here the rays are basically a measure of the total X-ray absorption or attenuation along a particular line from the source or X-ray source to a single detector. Now here, if we consider the red one being the source and this one being the detector, so if we consider this solid black line, this being my ray, because the total, and here it is the measure of the total attenuation of all the X-ray and along this line. The same can be said for this dotted green line. This is again a ray. So the final intensity of the X-ray depends on how much the beam is attenuated by the tissue along this line. This is a what we get as an output, which we'll talk later. Now projection is the all the rays at a given X-ray tube angle, or we can call it a series of rays that pass through the object at a same orientation. So here this entire green structure is nothing but a projection. Projection is all the rays at a certain angle. And coming to the how the X-ray image, CT images are formed, they are represented in terms of matrices, where each column and each row basically carries what we call a CT number. So uh, each column and row that the CT number has, they are known as pixels. Since we already talked about each slice has a certain volume, therefore they represent the voxels. What do we call a voxel? So voxel is nothing but, if you can informally say it, as 3D pixels. So each pixel in the image matrix has a distinct number which represents the X-ray absorption or the X-ray attenuation coefficient in the corresponding voxel of that object. So the CT number or this X-ray attenuation coefficient that is there in each of the pixels or each column and rows in the matrix, they are expressed in terms of Hounsfield units. It essentially represents the density of the tissue. So this, depending on the density, as we already talked about, X-rays are attenuated when they pass through a solid object. So depending on the density of the tissue in the human body, there will be the densities, the attenuation of the X-rays will be different, and this attenuation, the final output of that attenuated ray, will be saved in the matrix in terms of CT number, and they are expressed in terms of Hounsfield units. So every tissue, depending on their density, has a distinct value of Hounsfield unit that is very important for further post processing and understanding of the structure of of the object or the tissue. So here, this this gives a basic representation of the values of the several CT numbers or in their Hounsfield unit. So the baseline is known as distilled water, which has a 0, and the air has a negative 1000 CT number, whereas the bone that has a higher density, therefore can absorb the X-ray to greater extent as compared to soft tissues, has higher CT number that ranges between 400 to 300 to 2000, whereas metallic foreign bodies such as dental implants, hip implants, or any other metallic implants, they have higher densities as compared to a bone, and they has higher X-ray absorption, and therefore their CT number is greater than 2000 Hounsfield units. Now to talk briefly about the basic working principle, X-rays are basically used to slice an object to generate the 2D cross section of that particular object to represent its internal structures. So here, what is happening in case of computed tomography, there are narrow beam of X-rays are aimed at a patient and quickly rotated around that patient, producing signals that are processed by the machine computer. Therefore, the computed part comes to generate a cross-sectional images or slices, as we have talked earlier. These slices are called tomographic images and can give a clinician a more detailed information than the conventional X-ray. Once a number of successive slices are collected by the machine's computer, they can be digitally stacked or digitally overlaid one upon another to form a 3D representation of the patient or the subject's internal structure, which allows for easier identification of the basic structure as well as to find the abnormalities in the structure. So therefore, the X-ray slices or the X-ray slice data are generated using an X-ray source that rotates around the object, and it takes the images of the cross-sectional image of the body part, and the detector that are positioned on the opposite side of that records that image, and through computer processing, that image can be used to form a 3D representation. So these slice 3D structures or the cross-sectional images, a number of them, these such scans are progressively taken around that object, and finally the through tomography reconstruction technique, a 3D representation is generated. As the X-ray passes through the patient, as we already know, they get attenuated or absorbed. The amount of attenuation depends on the type of tissue based on their density, and therefore the X-ray imaging contrast or the X-ray image that is generated in the CT or the CT cross-sectional image contrast is nothing but the consequences of the differences in the attenuation values or the CT numbers of that adjacent tissues. So depending on the density and based attenuation of the X-ray beam, the brighter the tissue on the X-ray image or the CT image, that means lower attenuation, while the darker the tissue appears on the CT image, it basically means lower attenuation. So a bone that has higher attenuation of X-ray will appear brighter in the CT image, while soft tissues that has lower attenuation of X-ray will appear darker in the image. Therefore, these imaging distinction are used to better understand the different parts of the body. For example, during the scanning of chest, there are several layers. So there are soft tissue layers, there are bones, there are lungs tissues. So they, depending on this X-ray attenuation, they will appear in different shades of gray, and that is useful for the clinician to better visualize the internal structures. So this gives a schematic representation. So this being the source of X-ray, and there is the detector which is directly opposite to that, and in between the source and the detector there is the patient. The source rotates across around the patient, and the X-ray beam takes the cross-sectional images for different positions, for different angles of the source, and the X-ray detector gathers all this information, and finally through the help of a computer, cross-sectional representations are generated and they are stacked together to form a 3D representation, which can be seen here as well. So this is being the source and this being the detector. The source and the detector rotates and it covers the entire 360 degree of the object, and finally through the scans, through the cross-sectional slices, and using the computer based technology, a representation of the 3D structure or the 3D structure, internal structure, can be generated. Now, as we already talked about the attenuation of the X-ray, the important aspect when it comes to the image 3D reconstruction or the tomographic reconstruction of the image is known. It's given by the Beer's law, or sometimes called the Beer-Lambert's law. So what it basically states that if there is a X-ray beam having a certain intensity of I naught, and it passes through a object of thickness x having a attenuation linear attenuation coefficient of mu, and the final uh, intensity of the X-ray that reaches the detector being the I of x, then we can we can calculate the I using that they are related in this using this empirical formula, through which we can actually calculate the linear attenuation coefficient, which is the important aspect for generating the X-ray cross-sectional images. So all this, the X-ray attenuation based data that are used to form the 3D structure or the 2D cross-sectional representation of the structure, basically uses some algorithms to calculate the mu from all the data points of the projections. As I was talking earlier, so this is how the X-ray images or the X-ray attenuation, linear attenuation coefficients are used to calculate the computed tomography data. Now, from this image, there are different layers of different density of material density are present depending on the soft tissue layers, and they have different attenuation coefficients as well as thickness. So the intensity of the attenuated X-ray beam that reaches the detector element can be calculated using this. So they are basically the sum of all the attenuation coefficient along a particular ray. That we find it by integrating it through this over this length. This is what is used to generate the X-ray, the CT scan final image using the using the computerized algorithms. And this is like I said in previous slides, the CT image matrix basically represents the distribution of this average of the linear attenuation coefficients in terms of CT numbers or Hounsfield units that are associated with the voxels. So this grid basically represents all the mu values across this structure, like the one calculated through here. All the mu values, they are placed at all these voxels that are imaged. So this pixel array is basically calculated using the computer part, and that can be used for the visual representation of the densities. See here, a simplistic example. So this is again a knee joint, one of the cross-sectional slices of a knee joint of that can capture through a CT scan. And this is how the 3D representation looks like after the computer processing. So I'll end this one here, and we'll see for further understanding of the imaging modalities in the next slides. Thank you.